So now that we've set up our user profile page, the last thing we need to do is be able to edit our profile. You'll notice that as part of the default template, we get an edit link here. If we click on that, it gives us the resource cannot be found because we don't have an action to actually edit our profiles. So to set this up, we'll go into Visual Studio, we'll again jump to our Solution Explorer, come back to Controllers, and we'll go into Account Controller. So we'll cruise down to the bottom. I'm going to collapse that, and then we're going to add another action result, or another action. It's what you get for talking and typing at the same time. Add another action called edit. And this action will need to take in the ID of our user that we want to edit. And we're actually going to have an HTTP get, and an HTTP post. So we'll need a public action result, edit, and then we're going to have an edit view model. We haven't built it yet, but it's coming. Something to look forward to. All right, so let's start where we are. So HTTP get. So that action will need to get the user by ID. We'll then need to create a edit view model and then send the view model to the view. So the ID is coming in. So what we're going to need here is we'll need our DB context. And we'll also need to go ahead and create our edit view model because we need to populate it. So I'm going to copy that, go back to Solution Explorer. And again, you'll notice that this is a very regular action, this idea of creating a view model for our view, setting up our DB context. So begin to kind of identify these regular steps. And these are just steps of development. These are part of the process of building out your application. Now our edit view model will actually be fairly similar to our user profile view model. So for your time and the time of the video, I'm just going to copy these properties out. I could just as easily have typed them all in again, but I'm not. So we'll go ahead and just copy and paste these in here. The only thing I will want to add here is a public string of password. And we'll probably, if we're going to do password resets, we need a public string of password confirm. All right, date created, there will not be a modifiable field, and the user cannot set themselves up as an admin. So I'm going to delete those two properties as well while I'm in here. Okay, so we've got that piece in place. So that then turned our class declarations there to blue, so we're in good shape there. So that went ahead and changed our data type to blue, so that means that it exists. Thumbs up for us. All right, so now we need to get user from database. So this will be a user DTO object. And we'll do context dot users. And now that we could do a first or default, perfectly fine choices. We could do where followed by a first or default. Or when you're looking something up by its ID, there's actually another method called find. And you pass in the keys for a particular row. And since our ID is our primary key, we can simply pass in that ID, and that'll return us back our object. So this is actually a more efficient way of capturing it versus just doing a simple where statement. I haven't dug deep enough to see if the SQL code that's generated by find is actually different than using the first or the where. Yeah, I'm just going to say that. I'm not sure if the actual SQL is different, but I believe that there is some functionality that's different within the entity framework when you use the find versus the where. All right, so we have our user, so we'll do a quick if the user DTO equals null, then we'll return content and say invalid ID. And you'll notice some of these messages are kind of almost cryptic and overly simplistic, and that's actually for security reasons. I don't want to give away too much by saying, sorry, we couldn't find this user in our database, or whatever that case may be. Because if someone were to try to hack your site, giving them too much information, something as simple as saying the user can't be found in the database, tells them that there is a potential that there is a user, and that if we just give the right ID number, or we maybe do a SQL injection, that we might gain access to it. So simply just saying invalid ID gives them as little information as possible, but if it is an actual user, it gives them more than just saying dead page, nothing could be displayed. So you always have to balance out what's more important, giving the user information or trying to protect your application so that a hacker doesn't try to access it. All right, so we'll say edit VM equals new edit VM. Oh, my mouse is all over the place. And I realized that I actually initialized it up here. I'm going to delete that out. Now you may be wondering, why do I declare variables up here outside the using statement and then I initialize them down here inside? The reason for that is that we have to declare this variable outside of the using statement, because if it goes inside, the scope of this using statement stops at this curly bracket. So if the next line that we want to call is return view and send that edit view model along with the view, we have to at least declare the variable within the same scope. So I always like to say, if you declare something inside the curly brackets, it's dead once it reaches the end of the curly brackets. So in this case, I declared it up here at the scope of the function, and it will live until we get down to this curly bracket, which is the end of the function, at which point we've already done our return. Now, initializing it can happen anywhere, but it's the ability to see this variable or bucket to be able to use it in other places. So I choose to initialize it in here because if I end up not getting back a user DTO, I don't want to waste memory by initializing this edit view model and not using it. So I'm basically saying I'm going to create a variable. It's going to be empty. I then will see if I get a user, and if I don't get a user, I don't want to put an empty edit view model in memory. I just want to leave it and say, don't worry about that variable. There's nothing inside of it. It's an empty bucket. However, if I do have a user, then I do want to put object data in there, so then I actually do the initialization part of calling new edit view model. So this will be this game again, user DTO dot email address. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this. First name, first name. Now you may be wondering, how is he getting that to pop up every time? What I'm pressing is Control Spacebar. And what that does for me is it pops up that IntelliSense. So Control Spacebar, last name equals user DTO dot last name. Password, and I actually don't want to populate the password because that's just there for the user to type into user DTO dot username. So the password is there for the postback event, not for the get. All right, so we've initialized our edit view model. We can now take that edit VM object and return it as part of our view call, and that should at least give us a view to edit our profile. So let's go ahead and run it and see what happens. And we got a compile time error. So I've never really addressed this in this class, but I'd like to kind of just mention what this is saying to us. This is saying there were build errors, and it's asking you a question of, would you like to continue and run the last successful build? I've seen students click yes to this. And by clicking yes, they're like, well, my program ran. Well, yes, but it ran the last good build. So if you've made significant code changes and you choose yes, none of those code changes are going to get used. All that's going to happen is you're going to run old code. And then you're going to probably come and say, well, I made this change and I ran this and I hit yes, and then my change isn't showing up, my code's still broken. Well, it is. So make sure you click no. Because when you click no, you get the error list, and it tells you why your code didn't build. You can actually double click on one of these lines. It'll jump to that spot in your code. In this case, it's my postback edit. And the complaint, if I jump back to my error list, is that the account controller edit with the edit view model signature, not all code passed return a value. Well, I didn't put anything into the body of this function yet. So I'm simply going to say return view. Is that where I want to leave it? No, I want to still put work in there, but to get past the compile time error and actually check out the get, I need to put something in there so that my code will compile. So now I had a good compile. I can now go ahead and actually launch my app and make sure that it works. I'll go here, I'll click edit. Oh, and I forgot to do my view. So I did all that work, and it appears that I forgot to actually build my view. So I went through the work of setting up the controller, doing the action, setting up the view model, and I neglected to actually set up my view. This is what happens when you work without a script. All right, so this actually will be pretty easy to set up. We'll go back to our HTTP GET edit, right click, and do add view. We're going to do edit. I'm going to use the edit template, and this will need our edit view model. We'll leave everything else as the defaults. Make sure you're not doing a partial. Click add, and this will generate our edit view. So we'll save that, and I should be able to refresh this without building because it's just a view that I just created. So let's see what happens. And there we go. So we now have our edit view in place. You can see our first name, last name, email address. Gender is empty because we need to go back and fix that. Username is here, and then passwords are blank because we're not actually trying to capture those passwords and present them to the user. We want to say, hey, if you want to change your password, you need to set it here. So we've got the view part in place. We've got the HTTP GET set up for our edit. The next part will be to do the post back.